Hello! Welcome to Capital Sensei. Today, we're going to dive into a topic that's on everyone's mind, inflation. But we're not just going to talk about what it is. We're going to look at it through the eyes of the most successful investor in modern history, Warren Buffett. We'll explore his core principles for not just surviving, but actually thriving financially when the prices of everything seem to be going up. We'll cover the kinds of businesses he loves in these times, the ones he avoids like the plague, and what he thinks about common inflation hedges like gold and bonds. And remember, whenever we can, we answer your questions directly in the comments section. The best way to learn is together. So as we go through this, if you have a question or a personal story about how inflation has affected you, please share it below. Your experience can help someone else, and that's how we build a truly powerful community. So, what is inflation? Really, in the simplest terms, it's when your money buys you less today than it did yesterday. Imagine your money is like a big block of ice on a hot day. Even if you don't spend any of it, it's slowly melting away. That $50 bill in your wallet might still say $50 on it next year, but it might only buy you what $45 would buy you today. The value, the purchasing power, is what's shrinking. Warren Buffett has a much more visceral way of describing it. He calls inflation a giant corporate tapeworm. It sits inside a business, silently eating away at its earnings. A company might report higher profits in dollar terms, but if those dollars are worth less, are the owners, the shareholders, actually any richer? That's the illusion inflation creates. It makes you feel like you're moving forward when you might actually be running on a treadmill or even slipping backward. Let's make this crystal clear with an example. Imagine you own a small business that made a $100,000 profit last year. This year, you're thrilled because you made a $105,000 profit. That's a 5% increase. But if inflation for that year was 7%, your real inflation-adjusted profit actually went down. The tapeworm ate your 5% gain and then took another 2% for dessert. This is the trap that catches so many investors and business owners. They look at the nominal numbers, the dollar amounts, without considering what those dollars can actually buy. This is why Buffett is so incredibly focused on finding specific types of businesses that can fight back against this tapeworm. He isn't interested in businesses that just get by. He's looking for economic fortresses that can weather the inflationary storm and come out stronger on the other side. So what are the magic ingredients? What does he look for? It really boils down to two key characteristics that work in tandem. The first, and arguably most important characteristic, is pricing power. Now, that might sound like some fancy business school term, but the concept is dead simple. Pricing power is a company's ability to raise its prices to cover rising costs without losing its customers to competitors. It's about having a product or service so good or a brand so strong that your customers will stick with you, even if they have to pay a little more. Think about it like this. Imagine two coffee shops on the same street. One is a generic, no-name place that just serves basic coffee. The other is a beloved local spot with a unique roast, amazing service, and a brand that everyone in town knows and loves. Now, let's say the price of coffee beans, milk, and paper cups goes up by 10% due to inflation. The generic shop is in a tough spot. If they raise their prices by 10%, their customers might just say forget it and go to the gas station across the street or just make coffee at home. They have virtually no loyalty and no pricing power. But the beloved local shop? They can raise their prices and their loyal customers will likely grumble a bit, but they'll keep coming back. They aren't just buying coffee, they're buying the experience, the taste, the brand they trust. That is pricing power in a nutshell. Buffett's career is a masterclass in identifying this trait. One of his most famous examples is Coca-Cola. For decades, Coke has been able to slowly increase its prices around the world. When the cost of sugar, aluminum for the cans, and transportation goes up, Coca-Cola can pass a large portion of that cost on to you, the consumer. And let's be honest, if a can of Coke goes from $1.50 to $1.60, are you really going to switch to a generic store brand cola to save 10 cents? Probably not. That powerful brand, recognized in every corner of the globe, is its economic moat, and it gives the company tremendous pricing power. Another perfect example from his portfolio is Apple. Apple can and does increase the price of the new iPhone model almost every year. And what happens? Do people rush to buy cheaper Android phones? Some do, but millions of people still line up physically or virtually to buy the new iPhone. The brand, the ecosystem, the perceived quality, and the status give Apple an almost unbelievable ability to dictate its prices. This is a business that doesn't have to worry about inflation eating its lunch. It can simply charge more for lunch. This brings us to the second key characteristic of a great inflation-proof business. It needs low capital requirements. This is a bit more technical, but stick with me because it's just as important as pricing power. A business with low capital requirements is one that doesn't have to constantly spend huge amounts of money on new buildings, machinery, and equipment just to maintain its current level of business. Let's go back to our coffee shops. The coffee shop, while it has some equipment, is a relatively low capital business. Now, compare that to an airline. An airline is an incredibly capital-intensive business. They have to constantly buy multi-million-dollar airplanes, maintain them at a massive cost, and pay for huge amounts of fuel. Their business is a gigantic, hungry machine that always needs more money poured into it. Now, let's see what happens during a period of high inflation. The airline is in a world of hurt. The cost of a new Boeing or Airbus plane skyrockets. The price of jet fuel goes through the roof. The cost of labor for pilots and mechanics increases. The business has to spend more and more and more money just to keep its planes in the air. Their capital requirements are enormous and are now inflated. The software company, on the other hand, is in a much better position. Their main costs are salaries for their programmers and maybe some office space. While these costs will also go up with inflation, they don't have to replace a $200 million piece of machinery every few years. Their factory is a line of code, which can be duplicated and sold millions of times at almost zero additional cost. They are what we call asset light. This is why Buffett loves businesses like See's Candies, one of his earliest and most instructive purchases. See's Candies has pricing power because it's a beloved brand, especially for holidays and gifts. People aren't trying to find the cheapest box of chocolates. They are buying a tradition. At the same time, it doesn't take a ton of capital to grow. To sell more chocolates, they don't need to build a billion-dollar factory. They can add a new kitchen or a new retail kiosk for a relatively small amount of money. So, the golden combination, the holy grail for Buffett during inflation, is a business with both high pricing power and low capital requirements. These businesses get a double benefit. First, they can raise their prices to offset inflation. Second, they don't need to spend as much of their cash on replacing assets whose prices are also inflating. This means more real, inflation-adjusted cash profit ends up in the owner's pockets. Think of a company like American Express. They have a powerful brand that allows them to charge fees to both merchants and cardholders. That's pricing power. And what are their capital requirements? They don't have a giant factory churning out widgets. Their business is a network, a system of payments. It's an incredibly asset-light model. During inflation, their revenue from transaction fees goes up naturally as the price of goods and services rises, while their capital spending needs remain relatively low. It's a beautiful business model for an inflationary environment. Now, let's flip this on its head and talk about what to avoid. If the best businesses have pricing power and low capital needs, the worst businesses are the exact opposite. These are the companies that are in highly competitive industries, meaning they have no power to raise prices. And they are also capital intensive, meaning they have to spend a fortune just to stay in the game. Buffett calls these bad businesses. The classic example, as we've touched on, is the airline industry. Competition is brutal. Customers are notoriously price sensitive, often choosing flights based on a difference of just a few dollars. This means airlines have almost no pricing power. If one airline raises fares, another will just undercut them to steal market share. At the same time, as we discussed, they are incredibly capital intensive. It's a toxic combination. In an inflationary period, an airline gets squeezed from both sides. Their costs for fuel, planes, and labor are all exploding upwards. But they can't raise ticket prices enough to cover these rising costs because the competition is too fierce. Profits get vaporized. It's no wonder Buffett has famously said that if a capitalist had been at Kitty Hawk, he should have shot Orville right down. He's seen how much money has been lost by investors in the airline industry over the decades. Another industry that often struggles during inflation are regulated utilities, like your local power company. On the surface, they might seem stable. People always need electricity, right? That gives them a sort of captive audience. However, they face two major problems. First, they are extraordinarily capital intensive. Building and maintaining power plants, transmission lines, and the electrical grid costs billions upon billions of dollars. When inflation hits, the cost of all that steel, copper, and concrete goes way up. Second, and this is the real kicker, their prices are regulated by the government. A utility can't just decide to raise your electricity bill by 20% because its costs went up. It has to go before a public utility commission and argue its case, a process that can take a long time and is often politically charged. They often don't get the price increases they need to fully offset their own inflating costs. So they get squeezed, just like the airlines, but for a different reason. So the lesson here is to be just as aware of what to avoid as what to look for. During inflation, a bad business doesn't just perform poorly. It can become a real capital sink, where you have to keep pouring more and more money in just to get the same or even less of a real return out. It's like trying to fill a bucket with a hole in the bottom, and inflation just makes the hole bigger. Okay, so we've established that Buffett's strategy is to own wonderful businesses. But what about other types of assets that people typically flock to when they're scared of inflation? Let's talk about bonds, cash, and the big one, gold. Let's start with bonds. For decades, bonds were seen as the safe, conservative part of a portfolio. But Buffett has been very clear that in a period of sustained inflation, most bonds are a terrible investment. Specifically, he's talking about long-term, fixed-rate bonds. Think of buying one of these bonds as lending your money to a government or a company for, say, 10 or 30 years, in exchange for a fixed interest payment each year. Imagine you buy a 10-year bond today that pays you 3% interest. That might not sound great, but maybe you think it's safe. But what if inflation runs at 6% per year for the next 10 years? Every single year, your investment is losing 3% of its purchasing power. The $3 interest payment you get on your $100 bond buys less and less each year. And at the end of 10 years, when you get your original $100 back, that $100 will have the purchasing power of what maybe $60 or $70 has today. You got your money back, but you lost a huge chunk of your wealth in real terms. Buffett compares investing in these types of bonds during inflation to willingly signing up for a guaranteed loss. You are locking in a return that is lower than the rate at which your money is losing value. It's like agreeing to work for a fixed salary for the next 10 years, knowing full well that the cost of living is going to double. It just doesn't make any sense. Now, what about cash? Holding cash is even more straightforward. It's a guaranteed loser. If inflation is 7%, the cash under your mattress or in a zero-interest checking account is losing 7% of its value every single year, without a doubt. It is the melting block of ice we talked about earlier. While it's essential to have some cash for emergencies, holding large amounts of it for long periods during inflation is financial suicide. It's actively choosing to let the tapeworm eat your wealth without putting up any fight at all. This leads us to the asset that many people believe is the ultimate inflation hedge: gold. When people get scared about governments printing money and devaluing their currency, they often rush to buy gold. The logic is that gold is a real, tangible asset with a limited supply, so its value should hold up when paper money is losing its own. But Buffett has a very different and, I think, much more insightful take on gold. He doesn't hate gold, but he sees it as fundamentally unproductive. And for Buffett, an investment's ability to produce something is everything. He tells a famous story to illustrate this. Imagine you take all the gold in the world. At today's prices, it would form a cube about 68 feet on each side. It would be worth something in the neighborhood of $10 trillion. Now, what could you buy with $10 trillion? Well, you could buy all the cropland in the United States. You could buy ExxonMobil, one of the world's largest companies, about 16 times over. And after all that, you'd still have about $1 trillion left over for walking around money. Now, fast forward 100 years. What will you have? If you bought the cropland and the companies, you will have had 100 years of food production, 100 years of energy production, and trillions of dollars in dividends. Those assets will have worked for you, producing real wealth year after year. And what will you have if you bought the cube of gold? You'll have a cube of gold. It will still be sitting there. It won't have produced anything. It won't have paid you a dividend. It won't have invented a new technology. Its only value comes from the hope that in 100 years, someone else will be even more scared than you are today and will be willing to pay you more for it. You are entirely dependent on the next person's emotions. Buffett's view is that gold is an investment based on fear, while owning a great business is an investment based on faith in human ingenuity and progress. A great business is like a goose that lays golden eggs. Gold is just the goose, sitting there, doing nothing. He would much rather own the goose that produces rather than the metal that just sits. This is a fundamental difference in philosophy that separates him from many other investors. This doesn't mean the price of gold can't go up. It certainly can, and does, especially in times of panic. But Buffett isn't in the business of predicting panic. He's in the business of owning productive assets for the long term. He wants to own the farm, not a pet rock, no matter how shiny that rock might be. So, if Buffett avoids most bonds, hates holding cash, and is skeptical of gold, it really brings us back full circle to his core belief. The single best protection against inflation is to own a piece of a truly wonderful business. And if you can't find a wonderful business at a fair price, he has one more piece of advice that is perhaps the most valuable of all, and it applies to every single person, regardless of how much money you have to invest. The single best investment you can make, far and away, is in yourself, your own earning power. Think about it. If you're the best doctor in town, or the best plumber, or the best software engineer. You have pricing power over your own labor. When inflation hits and the cost of everything goes up, you are in a position to command a higher salary or charge more for your services. Your skills are an asset, and the better those skills are, the more valuable that asset becomes. Unlike a stock or a bond, your skills can't be taxed away. They can't be inflated away in the same way. If you invest time and money into becoming better at what you do, you are building your own personal economic moat. If you're a freelance writer, taking a course on marketing can increase your earning power. If you're a mechanic, getting a certification in electric vehicles prepares you for the future. This is an investment that pays dividends for the rest of your life. This is such an empowering idea. It means that even if you're just starting out and don't have a big investment portfolio, you have access to the single best asset class there is, your own potential. Developing your talents is a hedge against inflation that is completely within your control. No matter what the Federal Reserve does, no matter what happens in the stock market, your enhanced ability to provide a valuable service to society will always be in demand. So, let's try to tie this all together into a coherent strategy, a mindset. Buffett's approach to inflation isn't about frantic activity. It's not about trying to time the market or jumping from one hot asset to another. It's the opposite. It's about careful preparation and long-term thinking. It's about building a financial ark that is so sturdy it can withstand any storm, including the storm of inflation. That ark is constructed with planks made from wonderful businesses. Businesses with durable competitive advantages, the moats that give them pricing power. Businesses that are not a black hole for capital, allowing them to gush real free cash flow. When you own a collection of these businesses, you don't need to worry about the day-to-day inflation reports. You own a slice of an enterprise that is designed to navigate that environment successfully. It's also about what you don't do. You don't panic and sell your great businesses to buy something speculative. You don't get tempted by the siren song of fixed income bonds that offer a guaranteed loss of purchasing power. And you don't get so consumed by fear that you trade a productive, wealth-creating machine for an inert lump of metal. The core of the strategy is to shift your thinking from being a speculator on currency movements to being a long-term owner of businesses. When you own a stock, you're not just owning a ticker symbol that wiggles up and down on a screen. You own a fractional piece of a real company with real employees, real products, and real customers. If you've chosen that company wisely, based on the principles of pricing power and low capital needs, its intrinsic value will grow over time, and that growth will be your best defense against the corrosive effects of inflation. It requires patience, which is in short supply these days. It requires discipline to stick to your principles when everyone else is chasing the latest trend. And it requires the intellectual humility to admit that you can't predict the future. So the best you can do is prepare for it by owning things of tangible, durable, and productive value. At the end of the day, that's the real lesson from Warren Buffett. It's not a complicated formula or a secret algorithm. It's a timeless philosophy of investing in quality and letting the power of great businesses do the heavy lifting for you in inflationary times and in all others.